On the night of July 18th, 2021, caregiver Katina Brooks clocked out of her shift and began her usual trip home. It was a route she had taken dozens of times before. At 9:14 p.m., she sent a message. "I'm on my way." That was the last time anyone heard from her. Her car was never found. Her phone went dead within minutes, and Katina was gone without a trace. Days later, authorities recovered a single item that changed the entire case: her personal diary. What she wrote in it during the days leading up to her disappearance has never been fully explained. Watch this video till the end to find out what happened to Katina. Katina Brooks was 27 years old at the time of her disappearance. Those who knew her described her as calm, patient, and dependable. The kind of person people trusted almost immediately. She worked as a caregiver, moving from one home to another, often taking on cases that others turned down. Elderly patients with complicated needs, long hours, isolated locations. Katina didn't complain. She needed the work, and she took it seriously. Friends say she had a quiet strength about her. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking, but she showed up when it mattered. If someone needed help, Katina was usually the one who said yes. At the time, she was under a lot of pressure. Financially, things weren't stable. She was helping support her younger siblings while trying to keep up with her own expenses. Bills were stacking up, and turning down jobs wasn't an option. In the weeks leading up to July 18th, Katina had been actively searching for more shifts. She had taken on back-to-back assignments, sometimes working late into the night just to make ends meet. That's when she accepted a new caregiving job. It came through a referral, not from an agency she regularly worked with, but from someone who claimed to know a family in urgent need of help. The offer was immediate. The pay was slightly higher than usual, and the location was farther out than where she normally worked. Still, Katina agreed. According to those close to her, she didn't hesitate. She needed the money, and she believed it would just be another routine case. But there were small details she mentioned in passing that at the time didn't seem important. She told a friend that the job felt different, not dangerous, just unusual. She couldn't fully explain why. There were no official records of the patient through her usual channels. No formal contract. Just an address, a time, and instructions to arrive alone. Katina began the job a few days before her disappearance. She didn't say much about it at first, only that the house was quiet and that the patient required constant attention. But as the days passed, her communication with friends and family became less frequent. Shorter replies, delayed responses. Something had changed, even if she didn't directly say it. The only place she seemed to express herself fully was in her diary. Katina had kept it for years. She wrote in it almost every night, documenting her thoughts, her routines, and anything she felt was important enough to remember. And in the days leading up to July 18th, her entries began to shift. What started as simple notes about her new job slowly turned into something far more concerning. And the job Katina accepted was described to her as a live-in caregiving position for an elderly woman who needed constant supervision. It wasn't unusual for her. In fact, most of the work she took involved patients who required full-time care, often in their own homes. What stood out this time was how quickly everything was arranged. There was no formal interview, no detailed background provided, just a phone call, a brief explanation, and an address sent to her shortly after. The location was outside the areas she normally worked in, a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, where houses were spaced farther apart, and the streets grew darker the deeper you went in. It wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't busy either. When Katina arrived for the first time, she noticed how still everything felt. No nearby traffic, no people outside, just rows of older homes, and long stretches of silence between them. The house itself stood out immediately. It was larger than the others around it, an older structure that looked like it had been there for decades. The paint was slightly worn, the windows tall and narrow, and the front yard had been left mostly untouched. There were no signs of recent activity outside, no cars in the driveway, except the one that had been arranged to pick her up. Inside, the house was clean, but carried a sense of age that was hard to ignore. The floors creaked under light steps. The walls were lined with old photographs that didn't seem to follow any clear order, and the lighting was dim in certain areas, even during the day. Katina mentioned in her diary that her phone signal dropped almost completely the moment she stepped inside. She could still send messages occasionally, but calls were unreliable, often cutting off without warning. At first, she didn't think much of it. Remote locations often had poor reception, and she had dealt with that before. But this felt more inconsistent than usual. The patient she was assigned to care for was an elderly woman in her late 70s. Her name was Mrs. Hellbrook. According to the information Katina received, the woman suffered from memory issues and required assistance with daily routines, eating, medication, and supervision throughout the day and night. When Katina met her, Mrs. Hellbrook was sitting quietly in a chair near the living room window. She didn't speak much at first, just watched, as if trying to understand who had entered her space. Katina introduced herself, explained her role, and began going through the usual routine, checking medication schedules, preparing meals, observing behavior. For the most part, the patient remained calm. She followed instructions, responded when spoken to, and didn't show signs of aggression or distress. But there were moments that didn't quite fit. At times, Mrs. Hellbrook would say things that seemed out of place. Not random, but specific enough to feel intentional. Katina wrote about one of those moments in her diary. While helping her into bed one night, the woman suddenly looked at her and said, "You shouldn't stay here after dark." There was no explanation after that. No change in tone. She simply turned away, as if she hadn't said anything unusual at all. Katina assumed it was part of her condition. Confusion was expected in patients like this, but she still wrote it down. Another entry described how the patient would occasionally refer to someone else in the house, not by name, just as him. There was no record of anyone else living there, no other caregiver assigned, no family member present during Katina's shifts. When she asked about it, the woman would either go quiet or change the subject completely. As the days passed, Katina settled into the routine. Morning care, meals, medication, long hours of watching and waiting. The house remained quiet, almost too quiet. There were no visitors, no scheduled check-ins, just the same still environment day after day. At night, the silence became more noticeable, the kind that made small sounds stand out more than they should. Footsteps from upstairs, even though Katina was certain no one was there. Yet doors that seemed slightly out of place from how she remembered them. Shadows shifting across hallways when no lights had been turned on. She didn't panic. She didn't jump to conclusions. Instead, She documented everything. Her diary entries became more detailed, more observant, less about routine, and more about what she couldn't explain. She noted the exact times things happened, the positions of doors, the behavior of the patient, and while none of it pointed to something obvious, the pattern was clear. Something about the house didn't feel right, not in a way she could prove, not in a way she could easily describe to someone else, but enough for her to keep writing. The diary became one of the most important pieces of evidence in Katina's case. It wasn't just a personal habit. It was a detailed record of her daily life. She wrote consistently, usually at the end of each day, documenting what she experienced in a clear and structured way. Each entry was dated, short at first, simple observations, routine details. But as the days went on, the tone began to change. Investigators later confirmed that these entries were written in her own handwriting. There were no signs of alteration, no missing pages from the early section. What stood out was how naturally the shift happened. It didn't start with fear. It started with adjustment. July 5th. The house is too quiet, but I guess I'll get used to it. At this point, Katina was still settling into the job. Her writing was calm. Nothing unusual beyond the environment itself. A quiet house in a remote area, something she had experienced before. But just 2 days later, the tone began to shift. July 7th. She asked me who was walking upstairs, but we're alone. This was the first time Katina documented something she couldn't immediately explain. According to her notes, the comment came from Mrs. Halbrook during the afternoon. There had been no noise that Katina could hear at the time. No movement. Nothing that would suggest someone else was in the house. She didn't react strongly in the moment. She wrote it down and moved on. But by July 9th, the entries became more focused. Less about the patient and more about the house itself. July 9th. I heard footsteps at night, slow, deliberate. She didn't describe panic. She didn't describe running or checking every room. Instead, she focused on the details, the timing, the pace, the direction. According to the entry, the footsteps came from the upper floor, at a time when both she and the patient were downstairs. She made a note to check the house the following morning. There was no mention of finding anything. From this point on, Katina's diary began to change in structure. The entries became longer, more precise. She started writing things as they happened, not just at the end of the day. She noted sounds that repeated at similar times, subtle changes in the environment, small details that most people might ignore, but she didn't. The quietness she mentioned at the beginning no longer felt like something she was adjusting to. It became something she was observing, and whatever she was noticing, she made sure to record it. As investigators continued reviewing the diary, one detail became clear. Katina wasn't writing out of fear in the beginning. She was documenting patterns. By the time the entries reached July 10th, the tone had shifted again. Not dramatic, not emotional, but more focused, more deliberate. Like she was trying to make sense of something that didn't follow a normal explanation. July 10th. I checked every room. No one there. This entry followed her note about the footsteps. According to the timeline she wrote, the sounds had continued the night before. Same pacing, same direction, always above her. So she did what most people would do. She waited until morning and went upstairs. She documented it carefully. Every room opened, closets checked, windows locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No misplaced objects. Nothing that suggested someone had been there. And yet, the footsteps had been clear enough for her to describe them in detail. That same day, she added something else. She mentioned that one of the doors upstairs, the one at the end of the hallway, was slightly open when she got there. She was certain it had been closed the night before. There was no confirmation of how it moved. No sound she could recall hearing. Just a difference between what she remembered and what she saw. Later that evening, she noted another small detail. The lights in the hallway flickered briefly. Not repeatedly, just once. Long enough for her to notice. She didn't connect it to anything immediately. She simply wrote it down. The same way she had been recording everything else. By July 11th, the entries became more specific about the patient's behavior. July 11th. She keeps smiling at the hallway. Katina expanded on this in the lines that followed. According to her writing, Mrs. Halbrook had started directing her attention toward the same area of the house, the hallway that led to the staircase. It wasn't constant. It happened at random moments throughout the day. She would stop mid-conversation, turn her head slightly, and smile. Not react, not speak, just smile. Katina tried to engage with her during these moments, asking what she was looking at, if she needed something, if she recognized someone. The responses were inconsistent. Sometimes the patient would ignore the question completely. Other times, she would say something that didn't fully connect. Phrases like, "He's just standing there," or "He comes and goes." There was no one in the hallway when Katina checked. No movement, no sound. But the pattern continued. As the entries progressed, Katina began describing a growing awareness, something she hadn't mentioned before. Not fear exactly, but a constant sense that she wasn't alone. She wrote about it carefully, almost hesitantly. Moments where she would feel watched, even while doing routine tasks, preparing food, sitting in the living room, writing in her diary. There was no direct evidence attached to that feeling, no specific event that confirmed it, just a repeated awareness that didn't go away. She started adjusting her behavior because of it, keeping doors open instead of closed, positioning herself where she could see multiple parts of the house at once, avoiding certain areas after dark, especially the upstairs hallway. But she didn't leave. She didn't call anyone to report a problem. She didn't request to end the job early. Instead, she kept writing. Every detail, every change, every moment that didn't make sense. The entries remained controlled, structured, but underneath that structure, something was building. Not panic, not confusion, something quieter and more persistent. And it was starting to follow her through every part of the house. By the time investigators reached the next set of entries, the pattern had clearly changed. Katina was no longer writing once a day. The diary showed multiple entries within the same date, sometimes only minutes apart. Short observations, quick notes, fragments of thoughts written as things happened. It was no longer just documentation. It felt like she was trying to keep track of something in real time. The handwriting itself reflected that shift. Still recognizable, still hers, but less controlled. Lines slightly uneven, words occasionally pressed harder into the page. July 12th. I heard breathing behind me, but no one was there. She expanded on this entry in the lines that followed. According to her notes, it happened in the kitchen late in the evening. She had been standing near the counter, preparing something simple. when she became aware of a sound, close enough to feel immediate. Not footsteps, not movement across the floor. Breathing, slow, steady, right behind her. She wrote that she froze at first, trying to confirm whether it was real or something she imagined. She held her own breath, just to listen more clearly. The sound continued, close enough that she could describe its rhythm. Close enough that she was certain it wasn't coming from another room. When she finally turned around, there was nothing there. No one in the doorway. No reflection of movement. No shift in the air that would suggest someone had just left. She checked the entire downstairs area immediately after. Every room, every corner, nothing. That same entry ended with a short line, written slightly apart from the rest. I know what I heard. By July 13th, and the entries became more expressive. Still controlled, but carrying something heavier beneath the surface. July 13th. The hallway feels wrong, like something is waiting. This wasn't tied to a specific event. No sound, no movement, just a location. The hallway leading to the stairs had been mentioned before, but now it became the focus. Katina described how the feeling wasn't constant, but intensified at certain times, especially in the evening. She wrote about standing at the edge of it, looking down the length of the corridor, and feeling a resistance she couldn't explain. Not physical, but enough to make her hesitate before stepping forward. She began avoiding it unless necessary. If she had to pass through, she moved quickly. No stopping, no turning back. She also mentioned that the lighting in that area seemed inconsistent, not completely dark, but dimmer than the rest of the house, even when lights were on. Shadows appeared longer there, less defined. And although she never directly said it, the way she described it suggested that she no longer felt in control of that space. Later that same day, another entry appeared, shorter, more abrupt. I heard it again. No explanation attached, no detail about where or when, just that line. By July 14th, the situation had escalated further. July 14th. She told me, "He doesn't like you here." This entry referred directly to Mrs. Helbrook. According to Katina's notes, the statement came without warning. They had been sitting in the living room. Nothing unusual happening at the time. Then the patient turned slightly, not toward Katina, but toward the hallway, and said it. "He doesn't like you here." Katina asked who she meant. There was no immediate response. When she repeated the question, the patient looked back at her and smiled. The same kind of smile Katina had mentioned before. Calm, unexplained, as if the statement didn't require clarification. Katina wrote that she tried to stay professional, to treat it as part of the patient's condition. But she also admitted something in that entry, something she hadn't written before. I don't think she's confused when she says these things. After that, the entries became more frequent and more fragmented. Short sentences written across the page. "He's in the hallway again. Something moved upstairs. I'm not going up there tonight." She began noting the time beside certain lines. Late hours, often after midnight. Her focus had shifted completely. Less about caregiving, less about routine, almost entirely centered on what she was experiencing inside the house. There were no clear explanations in any of the entries, no conclusions, just observations, repeated with increasing urgency. And through all of it, one detail remained consistent. She never described actually seeing anyone, only hearing, only feeling, only knowing that something was there, without being able to prove it. The final entries in this phase showed a clear pattern. Whatever was happening, it was getting closer, not louder, not more obvious, just closer. By the time the diary reached mid-July, the pattern shifted again. This time, it wasn't subtle. The structure began to break. Entries overlapped. Sentences were cut short. Thoughts repeated across the same page, as if Katina was writing while trying to keep up with everything happening around her. Sleep was the first thing to go. There were multiple notes scattered across the pages referencing the same issue. Short lines written at different times, all pointing to one thing. She wasn't resting anymore. July 15th. I haven't slept in 2 days. The entry continued beneath it. According to her writing, every time she tried to sleep, something interrupted her. Not always a sound. Sometimes it was the feeling. That same awareness she had described before, but stronger now, closer, impossible to ignore. She wrote about lying down, closing her eyes, and immediately feeling like she needed to open them again, like something in the room was changing the moment she stopped looking. So she stayed awake. Hours passed without rest. The entries from that night appeared in short bursts across the page. I can hear it moving. Upstairs again. Why does it stop when I listen? Her phone signal, which had already been unreliable, dropped completely around this time. She mentioned it directly. No service at all now. No messages going through. No calls connecting. She wrote that she tried stepping outside, hoping the signal would return. It didn't. The house had become completely cut off. By July 16th, the entries took another turn. This was the first time Katina described actually seeing something. July 16th. Oh, I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway. The writing beneath that line was more detailed than anything she had written before. It happened late at night. She had been sitting in the living room, lights on, trying to stay awake. The hallway was visible from where she was. At some point, she looked up and noticed a shape. Not movement, not a shadow shifting. A figure standing at the far end of the hallway. Still, she didn't describe a face, didn't describe clothing in detail, just the outline. Enough to recognize that it was there. She wrote that she stayed completely still, watching it, trying to understand what she was seeing. Seconds passed. Nothing changed. The figure didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't step back, just remained in place. She considered calling out, but didn't. Instead, she stood up slowly, without breaking eye contact, and that's when the next line appears. It moved when I looked at it. That line was written again, lower on the page, slightly darker. It moved when I looked at it. She didn't explain how, didn't describe whether it came closer or disappeared, only that it changed the moment she focused on it. The rest of that entry becomes fragmented. I'm not imagining this. I know what I saw. It was there. From that point on, the entries became harder to follow, not because they didn't make sense, but because they came too quickly. Moments recorded one after another, without pause. She's talking again. She's not asleep. These lines referred to Mrs. Halbrook. According to Katina's notes, the patient's behavior had changed significantly at night. She was no longer quiet. She spoke clearly, not in the confused, broken way Katina had described before. Full sentences directed at someone, not at Katina. toward the hallway, toward the same place where the figure had been standing. Katina wrote that she listened from a distance at first, trying to understand what was being said. The tone was different, lower, more controlled, and at times, it didn't sound like the same voice she heard during the day. She didn't explain that further. She just wrote what she heard. "He's here. You shouldn't have come. He doesn't want you here." By July 17th, the entries reached their peak. The handwriting was tighter, more compressed, like she was trying to fit everything onto the page before something interrupted her. July 17th. It moved when I looked at it. This line appeared again, at the top of the page, repeated, underlined once, then followed by more entries written beneath it. I saw it again. Same place. It's closer now. She described the distance differently this time. Not at the end of the hallway, closer to the middle. Still standing, still not fully visible, but no longer far away. She wrote that she didn't approach it, didn't try to confirm it. She stayed where she was, watching, waiting. The entries after that become more urgent. I can't keep doing this. I need to leave. And then one final line at the bottom of the page, written slightly larger than the rest. It's not staying upstairs anymore. After that, the entries stopped for several hours. No timestamps, no additional notes, just empty space on the page. And whatever happened during that gap was never written down. What happened after Katina left the house is not recorded in her diary. From this point forward, everything investigators know comes from timelines, phone data, and the account of a single witness. According to the information gathered, Katina left the property later that evening, exactly as she had planned. There were no signs of struggle inside the house, no indication that anything had happened before she stepped outside. Her belongings were with her, her bag, her phone. The front door was found closed behind her. The road leading away from the house was quiet, the same way Katina had described the area in her earlier entries. Long stretches with no activity, no streetlights in certain sections, just a narrow path leading back toward the main road. At some point after leaving, Katina attempted to make a call. Phone records later confirmed that an outgoing call was placed that night. The connection lasted only a few seconds before it dropped. There was no audio recovered, no confirmation of what was said, or if anything was said at all. But the attempt itself suggested one thing. She was trying to reach someone. Investigators traced her last known movement along that same road, moving away from the house. And then, a witness came forward. A neighbor who lived several houses down reported seeing Katina that night. The timing matched. According to the statement, it was late, dark enough that details were difficult to make out clearly. But the figure was visible under the limited light coming from a nearby property. The witness described seeing a woman walking alone, moving at a steady pace. No sign of panic, no sign of running, just walking, as if she was heading somewhere specific. Then, something changed, and the witness stated that Katina suddenly slowed down, not because of anything visible in front of her. There were no cars passing, no other people on the road. She just slowed and then stopped completely. The witness described it as unusual, enough to hold their attention. Katina remained still for a few seconds, and then she turned around, not casually, not like someone checking their surroundings. The movement was more direct, more intentional. as if she had heard something or someone. There was no one visible behind her, no headlights, no approaching footsteps, nothing that the witness could identify. But Katina stood there, facing back toward the direction she had just come from, toward the house. The witness reported that she didn't move immediately after turning. She just stood there, as if focusing on something in the distance. And then she took a step back, not forward, back, a small movement, but clear enough to notice. After that, the witness lost sight of her. There was no clear moment where she disappeared, no sudden event, just a point where the figure was no longer visible on the road. Search teams later combed the entire area, the road, the surrounding properties, the path leading back to the house. There were no signs of where she went next, no dropped items, no footprints leading off the path, nothing to indicate whether she continued walking or if something caused her to stop completely. The last confirmed moment remains that image. Katina standing alone on an empty road, turning around, as if something behind her had called her back. The investigation into Katina Brooks' disappearance officially began the following morning, when she failed to return home and couldn't be reached. At first, it was treated as a missing person case, but as details started to come in, the situation quickly escalated. Investigators began by reconstructing her final known movements. Timeline reconstruction, July 18th, evening. Katina leaves the residence where she had been working. Shortly after, her phone attempts an outgoing call. Connection lasts only a few seconds before dropping. Later that night, a neighbor reports seeing her walking along the road before stopping and turning around. That was the last confirmed sighting. From there, the search area was established. Officers focused on the road where she was last seen, expanding outward into nearby properties, wooded areas, and surrounding paths. Hours passed with no results. Then, a discovery was made. Her bag was found near the roadside, not far from where the witness reported seeing her. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried. Just left there, placed in a way that didn't suggest it had been thrown or dropped during a struggle. Inside the bag, investigators found her personal belongings, her phone, battery completely dead, no signs of damage, no indication that it had been tampered with, and most importantly, her diary, the same diary she had been writing in every day. It was intact. No missing pages, no visible attempt to remove or alter anything. This immediately shifted the direction of the investigation, because now there was a record, a detailed account of the days leading up to her disappearance. While one team processed the items found at the roadside, another was sent to the house where Katina had been working, the location she had documented repeatedly in her entries. According to official reports, the house appeared normal, no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, no visible disturbance in any of the rooms. Everything was in place. Furniture undisturbed, windows locked, doors functioning as expected. The upstairs area, which Katina had referenced multiple times, showed no indication that anyone else had been there. No additional footprints, no personal belongings belonging to another person. Nothing. Investigators checked the hallway she had written about, in the staircase, every room. There were no physical signs that supported the experiences described in her diary. The environment didn't match the escalation recorded in her entries, which raised a question that investigators couldn't immediately answer. If everything inside the house was normal, Then what exactly had Katina been documenting? The final step was to speak with the only other person present in the house, Mrs. Halbrook, the patient. Her initial condition appeared consistent with what had been reported: elderly, limited mobility, signs of memory issues. At first, her responses were minimal, basic answers, short sentences. But when asked about Katina, her reaction changed. According to the interview notes, she acknowledged that Katina had left the house that night. She left, she said. There was a pause after that. And then, she added something else, a statement that was later documented in the case file. But she wasn't alone. Investigators asked her to clarify. Who was with her? Did she see someone? Did anyone come to the house? The responses that followed were inconsistent. At times, she would repeat the same sentence. Other times, she would go quiet completely. There was no clear identification of another person. No name, no description, just that one statement, repeated more than once during questioning. She wasn't alone. With no physical evidence supporting the presence of another individual, the investigation reached a difficult point. On one side, the timeline: a woman leaves a house, is seen walking alone, and then disappears without a trace. On the other, the diary, a detailed, consistent record of events that suggested something was happening inside that house, something that intensified over time, but without physical confirmation. Those entries remained just that, unverified. Still, investigators couldn't ignore one key detail. Everything Katina experienced, everything she documented, led directly to the moment she left, and whatever happened after she turned around on that road was never seen and never explained. The final page of the diary was different from everything that came before it. There was no structure, no spacing between thoughts, just lines written quickly, one after another, as if time was no longer on her side. Investigators noted the change immediately. The handwriting was still Katina's, but rushed, uneven, pressed harder into the paper in some places, lighter in others. It didn't read like an entry written at the end of the day. It read like something written in the middle of a moment. At the top of the page, the final timestamp, July 18th. No specific time written beside it, just the date, and beneath it, the last words Katina ever recorded. It's standing in the hallway. The line is short, direct, no description of how it appeared, no explanation of when it got there, just confirmation. Something was there. The next line follows immediately after. She's talking to it like it's been here for years. This entry connects directly to Mrs. Holbrook. According to what Katina wrote, the patient wasn't reacting with confusion. She wasn't asking questions. She was speaking, as if she already knew what was there, as if it wasn't new, as if it had always been part of the house. The writing becomes slightly more uneven after this, the spacing tighter. It knows my name. There's no explanation attached to that line, no detail about how, no context, just that statement, written clearly enough to stand out from everything around it. Investigators noted that this was the first time Katina suggested direct awareness from whatever she had been documenting, not just presence, recognition. The next line is written lower on the page, slightly slanted. I'm leaving now, but I don't think it's going to let me. This is the last complete sentence, the last moment where her thoughts appear fully formed. After this, there are marks on the page that don't form clear words, partial lines, interrupted strokes, as if the writing stopped suddenly. There are no further entries after that. No closing statement. No indication of what happened next inside the house. Just that final sentence, left unfinished in its meaning, and everything that followed was never written down. No body was ever found. Search teams continued for days, then weeks. The surrounding areas were combed repeatedly. Nearby properties were checked. Every possible route she could have taken was mapped out and searched. Nothing. No additional belongings. No signs of a struggle. No evidence pointing to where she went after that final sighting. It was as if she simply disappeared. The case remained open, but with no new leads, progress slowed. Eventually, it was classified as an unsolved disappearance. What investigators were left with were fragments. A timeline that ended on an empty road, a bag left behind, a phone that went silent, and a diary filled with entries that became more difficult to explain the closer they got to the end. Over time, different theories began to form. One possibility was psychological, that the isolation, the pressure, and the lack of sleep may have affected Katina's perception. That what she documented in the diary could have been influenced by exhaustion, stress, or fear building over time. But that theory left questions unanswered. It didn't explain the consistency of her entries. It didn't explain the timing of her disappearance, or why she never reached safety after leaving the house. Another theory focused on the house itself. That something about the environment, something not immediately visible during the investigation, may have played a role. Katina had described patterns, specific locations, repeated experiences tied to the same areas. But when the house was examined, nothing physical supported those claims. Everything appeared normal. And then, there was the statement from Mrs. Halbrook. She left, but she wasn't alone. A detail that didn't fit cleanly into any explanation. No one else was seen entering or leaving the property. No evidence suggested another person was present that night. And yet, that statement remained part of the case file, unresolved, unexplained. In the end, what happened to Katina Brooks was never determined. No confirmed sequence of events after she turned around on that road. No clear answer as to why she stopped or what made her look back. Only questions and one final possibility that couldn't be proven, but also couldn't be completely dismissed. If Katina really left that house, then who or what was following her? What do you think happened to her? If you like this mystery, chilling video, don't forget to like and subscribe.